So now our top story this hour as well. The far-right National Rally is set to be the biggest party in Parliament. This is as France approaches the decisive second round of the general election. The polls show, though, that the populist party may fall short of a majority, which could lead to legislative gridlock in a hung Parliament. For more on this now, we're joined by SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena on the line. So, Sophie, the second day today of snap elections, what are yesterday's outcomes?
Well, it is the first day of the second round. You know that the first round was last week Sunday, and in areas where there was no clear outright winner, now you have a second round where you will have candidates number 1 and 2 contesting to ensure that you have a final winner, an outright winner, in those areas where there were no such. For example, the leader of the far-right organization or party or member, Marine Le Pen, was able to win a constituency where she came from. And therefore, that area, you are not going to have elections again. So only those areas where there was no clear outright winner, where there's almost like a rerun, where you'll have elections today. And therefore, again, we are expecting, according to the polls, the far right to do well. The other issue is that if the current president, Emmanuel Macron, and his centrist party was able to convince particularly the left parties to support them and not avail candidates in areas where you are going to have again contestation, maybe Macron can be able to recover the lost ground, but it is quite shaky for Emmanuel Macron, centrist party, the candidates thereof.
And Sophie, as you've rightfully mentioned, the first round was last week, and now we're seeing the second round of these snap elections happen. And these elections have also been described as somewhat of a big gamble. But should Macron really feel threatened by the far-right party?
Yes, he should, particularly looking at what transpired during voting for the European Union Parliament. The far-right parties got more seats in the European Union Parliament. That prompted him to call this snap elections. And last week, his centrist alliance came third, beaten by the far-right and also the left-wing parties. And therefore, it is quite a difficult one for him. And that is why many people are saying that it was indeed a gamble. And remember, his term ends in 2027. Now, if the far right is able to do well, and you have many members of that group going to parliament, then you will be forced to share power with the far right. And he will have to appoint the leader of the far-right party, who is 28 years old. We know that when he got into power not long ago, he had to appoint a prime minister, a younger person, 34 years old. But if this far-right party is able to get lots of seats in parliament, he will have to share power with that the party, and therefore he will have to appoint a leader from that party, and we are told that he is 28 years old, and it will be the youngest person to have been a prime minister in that country. We know that 3 decades ago, a similar situation did prevail when the then president of France, Francois Mitterrand, who's a socialist, had to appoint Jacques Chirac, who came from the Conservatives, as a prime minister, where there was power sharing. And at that time, the politics of France and governance in particular, there was a lot of tension because you had socialists and a conservative sharing power. We are looking at a similar situation should the far-right party be able to do well. But you know that many people are encouraging the left to go out and do better so that you can weaken the far right. We had yesterday the independent candidate who won in UK, Jeremy Corbyn, who is a socialist, the former leader of Labour Party, mobilizing the Socialist Party in France to push back against the far right.
And quite concerning at this point, Sophie, is the reports as well of more than 50 French candidates and activists that have been physically attacked ahead of the polls. What more do we know on this front?
You know that when it was clear that the far right is making strong inroads, many people were not happy, particularly those who are against the policies of the far right party. You know that they are very clear in terms of if they are able to get into power, they are going to push back, particularly when you look at the migration laws, and they don't agree with what's happening in France, where you are seeing many illegal immigrants and asylum seekers in that country. Secondly, you know that the far-right party does not support the continued pumping of money, euros, to Ukraine because of the war in Ukraine. Marine Le Pen had promised that if they get into government or they get enough power, they will push back against funding the war in Ukraine in support of Ukraine. And therefore, this is something that those who are sympathetic to Ukraine, but particularly the people in France and those who are supporting the left in particular, are trying to push back. And that also led to some violence last week when it was clear that the far right is going to do well. And now, again, we expect similar tensions. And we are told that this time around the government has made a point that the security is in place, but we don't know. You always have this police out there trying to quell these tensions in France, but they do get out of hand all the time. And therefore the issue of security is a critical one as we are about to see a second round of elections in that country with an outcome expected early tomorrow morning, but with the opinion polls and the election poll being communicated much earlier at around South African time, 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. So we'll get a clearer or an indication where this is going. But of course, early in the morning, a concrete indication in terms of the results, whether Macron was able to recapture the lost ground. And this happens at a time where he's supposed to travel to Washington for the NATO summit in the United States of America. On the other hand, you have also the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who will be traveling to Washington for this NATO summit. And this issue of Ukraine will be high on the agenda. And when Macron is making input in relation to that, he will be taking into consideration the outcome of the elections in France, where this issue is a burning issue.
And interestingly, Sophie, we are now starting to see far-right parties gaining in exit polls. And case in point would be Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands. How does this particular moment, sort of like shift the landscape, political landscape of this country?
Yes, it is a strong wave of far-right movement making inroads, not only in those countries that we've mentioned, including the United Kingdom. When you analyze the elections properly in the United Kingdom, you will realize that the Labour Party was able to do well because the far-right party were able to also get seats in parliament, and therefore there's already a move to push to ensure that the coming elections or next elections, the far-right party is able to do much better. And this is a problem in Europe, and not only in Europe. We know what's happening in the United States of America ahead of the elections in November. And therefore, you have that kind of a problem. And it's not only in those countries. You know, when you look at the elections in South Africa, it might not be as glaring as it is in Netherlands, in Germany, and also as we expect in France. But you can see that there's some sort of a pushback in terms of ensuring that you have some radical ideologies making inroads in certain countries. And at times you can see that the issue of the right-wing phenomenon is also being experienced in South Africa, very, very subtle, in a different form. And therefore this is a problem. And that is why Jeremy Corbyn yesterday made an appeal, in fact globally, that the left and the socialists must try very hard to ensure that they do push back, and therefore making an example of France in particular. And this is a problem. Europe is experiencing this, and the war in Ukraine has kind of contributed to this view and this wave of right-wing parties doing well in some countries in Europe. As you pointed out recently, the Netherlands, Germany is having the same problem, and France also. And as I pointed out, the United Kingdom is not spared either.
And interestingly, these elections, most discussions, Sophie, are around that this could possibly oust President Macron's centrist alliance and leave him to possibly see out the remaining 3 years of his term in an awkward partnership with the far right. What is likely to happen, just before we let you go?
Yes, it will be very difficult. As I pointed out that 3 decades ago, a similar scenario did play itself with Francois Mitterrand and also Jacques Chirac. And it will be the same. And it's not going to be easy, you know, when you have in your government people with different approach and ideology. And they are going to use that moment and those seats to make their voices heard as part of build up to next elections. Because when you share government, when you are in a power sharing government, every political party in that government will use the little power or seat or opportunity they have to position themselves for the next election as part of the build up. And in that way, you will continuously lose power. Finally, you'll be completely wiped out. And this is what's going to happen with Macron. If far right is part of the government, clearly the far right is going to use this opportunity and this power they have now to build for next elections. And that is why Jeremy Corbyn said the left must push back. Power sharing by its nature means you are almost infiltrated in a sense that you are going to be weakened because you are sharing power, and those people have power to say whatever they want to say. And as they perform, they get credit, and they can use that next election to say, this is what we have done when we came into power, and therefore please give us more power because we can do better. That's exactly what's going to happen in South Africa. All those parties that are part of the government of national unity, there's no way they're going to sit there and just do and be told what to. They are going to use those little steps to build for 2026, the local government in 2029. And therefore, this is what's going to happen with France in terms of their far right now believing that they can do better in terms of the next presidential polls or after 2027.
All right, Sophie Mokoena is SABC News International Editor. Thank you very much indeed for your insights.